It started as just another quiet Tuesday, a normal work-from-home morning in my peaceful little cul-de-sac. Birds chirping, coffee steaming, life perfectly calm. Until I looked out my window and saw it, a dented silver SUV parked dead center in my driveway. Not the street, not a mistake, my driveway. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a delivery mix-up maybe. But then it came back, again and again. The same car, the same woman, the same smug expression. That's when I realized this wasn't confusion. It was declaration. What followed turned my calm suburban life into a full-blown HOA thriller. Polite notes, tense standoffs, and one unforgettable act of petty revenge involving a tow truck and a very expensive lesson. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes with chains, flashing lights, and $150 in small bills. It all started on a Tuesday. I know with absolute certainty it was a Tuesday, because that's the day of my weekly soul-crushing budget meeting on Zoom. It's a 2-hour spreadsheet marathon that feels like being slowly nibbled to death by numbers. The agenda is always the same. The talking points are recycled from the week before, and it invariably leaves my brain feeling like a lump of overcooked oatmeal. As I was finally closing my laptop, letting out that long, guttural post-meeting sigh that's become a sacred ritual, I glanced out my home office window, which looks right out onto the front of my house, over my lawn and driveway. And that's when I saw it. An anomaly in the code. A car. Not my car, that was tucked away safe and sound in the garage, but a stranger's car. It was a silver SUV, one of those vaguely familiar domestic models you kind of recognize but can't quite put a name on, like a third-tier celebrity. It wasn't new. It had clearly lived a hard life. There was a nice constellation of dings on the passenger door, as if it had a long and storied history of losing fights with rogue shopping carts. There was a faded bumper sticker peeling off the back, a casualty of sun and rain. I squinted, trying to make it out. It looked like it might have once been one of those stick-figure family decals, but now it was just a ghostly white smudge. The car was parked right at the end of my driveway, not all the way up, not blocking me in, but just far enough that it was flagrantly, undeniably on my property. Its back tires were sitting squarely on the concrete I paid a mortgage on. My first reaction wasn't anger, not even close. It was just profound confusion. A mental buffering wheel started spinning in my head. I live in a neighborhood with an almost comical amount of street parking. At that very moment, the curb was a vast empty expanse of gray, stretching wide open up and down the entire street. You could have parked a fleet of moving vans out there. So why? Why would anyone, in a world of infinite free and legal choices, choose to park in a complete stranger's driveway? It didn't make any sense. My brain, desperate for order, started flipping through a Rolodex of rational explanations. A delivery driver on a quick stop? But the car was empty, engine off, and there were no packages on my porch or any of my neighbors. Did it break down? A sudden, catastrophic engine failure right at the foot of my driveway? But there was no smoke, no hazard lights blinking, no forlorn driver kicking the tires. It was just sitting there. A silent, metallic trespasser. I watched it for a few minutes, honestly expecting someone to come jogging out of a neighbor's house, waving their hands apologetically. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. My mother-in-law is visiting and she gets confused." But nothing. The car just sat there under the afternoon sun, an immovable monument to some unknown person's questionable decision-making. I finally turned away and went to the kitchen to make some coffee, telling myself to chill out. It's probably a simple mistake. Someone visiting the neighborhood for the first time who completely misjudged the curb. a momentary lapse in spatial awareness. They'll be gone in a bit. I'm not the kind of guy who gets worked up over little things. I pride myself on it. An hour later, the car was still there. The coffee was gone, my caffeine-induced calm was wearing off, and my initial confusion was curdling into a low-grade annoyance. It was the principle of the thing, you know? It's my driveway. It's an extension of my home. It's not a public parking lot, not an overflow lot for the street. It just felt bold, audacious. I had to run an errand to the post office, and while I wasn't completely blocked in, I'd have to perform a careful, multi-point turn to maneuver around it. It was a small thing, a minor inconvenience, but it was an unnecessary thing. I walked outside, half hoping the owner would magically materialize so we could have a quick, "Oh, sorry, my bad," and we could both move on with our lives. But the street was dead silent. I carefully backed out of my garage, swinging wide around the SUV, and went on my way, just shaking my head in disbelief. By the time I got back 45 minutes later, it was gone. A wave of palpable relief hit me. "See?" I told myself out loud, the sound of my own voice echoing in the garage. It was nothing. Just a weird, one-off event. A glitch in the suburban matrix. The mystery was over. I went inside, got back to work, and by the time I was making dinner, I'd completely forgotten about the silver SUV. It was just a blip on the radar of my quiet life. Oh, how naive I was. I had no idea that wasn't the end of the story. That was just the prologue. 2 days later. Thursday. I remember I was on my lunch break, assembling a particularly ambitious sandwich with turkey, provolone, and a layer of strategically placed jalapenos. I was standing at the kitchen counter, feeling pretty good about life, when I glanced out the kitchen window toward the driveway. My heart didn't just sink, it plunged. There it was, the same silver SUV, the same collection of dings, the same ghostly bumper sticker, the same gutsy, property-infringing parking job. It was like a bad sequel that went straight to video, a sequel nobody asked for. This time, there was no confusion. It was replaced by a sharp, immediate spike of irritation. This wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. Once is an accident, a statistical anomaly. Twice, in the exact same spot, in the span of 3 days, when the entire street had acres of free, legal parking, was not an accident. It was a choice. It was a pattern. My mind started racing, trying to comprehend the thought process. Who does this? Who repeatedly, consciously, parks on someone else's private property? I just stood there, sandwich in hand, forgotten, staring at the car as if it might offer up its secrets. It felt personal now. This wasn't just a car. It was a deliberate act. I tried to think logically to suppress the growing anger. Okay, it's almost certainly a guest of a neighbor. But my immediate neighbors, the Hendersons, were an elderly couple who rarely had visitors, and when they did, it was their son in his very recognizable blue pickup truck. The family on the other side was a young couple with 2 toddlers. I knew their cars, and this wasn't one of them. Someone farther down the street then? But that made even less sense. Why park here? It was a longer walk to every single house on the cul-de-sac except for mine. It was the least convenient spot for anyone but me. I felt that anxious, familiar knot tighten in my stomach. The one you get before a confrontation you desperately don't want to have. I hate confrontation. I will go to absurd lengths to avoid it. But this was my home, my sanctuary, and this silver SUV felt like a passive-aggressive 4,000-pound middle finger pointed right at my front door. I decided I couldn't let it go. Ignoring it yesterday had only invited a repeat performance. But I wasn't ready to go knocking on every door on the block just yet. I still wanted to cling to the fragile hope that this person was just supremely, unbelievably clueless, not an active, malicious jerk. So I went with what I thought was the most reasonable, non-confrontational, Canadian-level polite move available. The polite note. I spent way too much time writing it. A truly embarrassing amount of time. I wrote a draft, read it, and crumpled it up. Too aggressive. Wrote another. Too meek. It sounded like I was apologizing for her parking on my property. I wanted to be firm but friendly, assertive but approachable. I finally landed on what I felt was the perfect blend of polite and get off my lawn. I wrote it on a clean sheet of printer paper in my best, most non-threatening handwriting. Hi there. This is a private driveway. Could you please park on the street instead? There's usually plenty of space. Thank you so much. I even added a smiley face. A smiley face. That's the universal sign for I'm not a psycho, right? It's the olive branch of punctuation. Armed with my carefully crafted diplomatic communique and a roll of Scotch tape, I took a deep breath and went outside. I felt like a suburban spy on a covert mission, my head on a swivel, looking around to make sure no one was watching before I quickly and quietly taped the note to the driver's side window. It was positioned perfectly, right at eye level. Impossible to miss. I scurried back inside, my heart beating a little too fast, feeling a ridiculous sense of accomplishment. Mission complete. The message was sent. Surely any normal, reasonable human being would see it, feel a minor pang of embarrassment, think, oops, my bad, and that would be the end of it. The smiley face would save the day. Around 5:30 p.m., I was in my office when I saw movement. A woman was walking down the street. She had one of those sharp, angular blonde haircuts, the one that's less of a hairstyle and more of a threat. She was chatting loudly, almost shouting, into her phone as she walked with a purpose right up to the SUV. I held my breath, moving closer to the window. This was it, the moment of truth. She saw the note. She paused her stride, her phone conversation continuing uninterrupted. She plucked it off the window, held it for maybe a single second, her eyes barely scanning it. And then, I am not kidding, she crumpled it up into a tight little ball without missing a single beat in her phone conversation, tossed it into the gutter in front of my lawn, got in her car, and drove off. She never even looked at my house. Not once. No flicker of, oops, no sheepish glance, no sign of recognition that she had just been called out for trespassing. Just nothing. She had received my polite, carefully worded, smiley-faced message, processed it as garbage, and literally threw it away. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard lump of dread. Okay, this was not a clueless person. This was something else entirely. My intro to Karen culture wasn't a meme anymore. It was a crumpled-up ball of paper sitting in my gutter. The next Monday, it happened again. At this point, it had transcended annoyance and was bordering on darkly comical. That crumpled note in the gutter should have been a giant, flashing neon sign that politeness wasn't just failing, it was being actively mocked. Around 10 a.m., I watched from my now familiar perch at the office window as the silver SUV pulled up with a casual, unearned confidence. The same woman got out, already on her phone, barking into it about someone named Brenda being incompetent. She slammed the door and walked off down the street without a single look back. She was treating my driveway like her personal valet service, a convenient drop-off point for her daily excursions. I was done with notes. The smiley face was dead and buried. Today I had to actually talk to her. My palms immediately started to sweat. I felt a pit form in my stomach. I began rehearsing my lines like an actor preparing for a dreaded audition. Be calm. Be firm. Excuse me, this is my property. You can't park here. Simple. Direct. Unambiguous. I said it out loud to my empty office. It sounded reasonable enough. The problem was, I had no idea when she'd be back. Her schedule was a mystery. Was it an hour? 3 hours? All day? I certainly wasn't about to stand guard on my own lawn, peering out from behind a bush like a neighborhood watch volunteer on his first day. So I just went about my work, stewing. Every couple of minutes, my eyes would drift to the window. Every time I saw that car, that monument to her entitlement, it felt like a personal insult. It was a 2,000-pound steel manifestation of her belief that her convenience trumped my property rights. Late in the afternoon, around 4 p.m., I saw her walking back, phone once again glued to her ear. It was now or never. My heart started pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This is it. I took a deep, shaky breath, opened my front door, and walked out onto my porch, trying my best to project an aura of a confident, in-control homeowner. An aura I definitely did not feel. I felt like a middle schooler about to ask someone to a dance. She was just about to pull on her car door handle when I spoke. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was a little higher, a little shakier than I'd hoped. She turned slowly and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance, like I was an annoying pop-up ad that had just interrupted her browsing experience. She didn't say a word. She just raised her eyebrows, a silent, disdainful, "What?" "Hi," I started, trying to find my footing. "I'm the one who left the note on your car the other day." A brief flicker of recognition crossed her face, but it was immediately followed by a look of utter indifference. There was zero remorse, zero embarrassment. "And?" she said, her tone as sharp and brittle as a shard of glass. "And," I said, my own voice getting a little stronger, fueled by her dismissiveness, "I need you to stop parking in my driveway. This is private property." She actually scoffed. A genuine audible scoff. She put a hand on her hip, shifting her weight into that classic, universally recognized, "I'm about to be incredibly difficult" pose. "I'm just parking here for a little bit," she said, as if this was a magical incantation that made trespassing perfectly acceptable. "It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal to me," I shot back, feeling a surge of frustration. "It's my property, and there's plenty of parking on the street. Right there," I pointed, with a bit of a dramatic flourish, to a huge, empty stretch of curb just a few feet away from where we were standing. She glanced lazily where I was pointing, and then looked back at me as if I were the dumbest man alive. "Look," she said, her voice now dripping with a thick, syrupy condescension that made my skin crawl. "The street is for long-term parking." "I'm not here that long. This is more convenient." I was speechless. My mouth was literally hanging open. My brain was trying to process the logic and was coming up with a 404 error. The public street, designed for public parking, was for long-term parking, but my private driveway, designed for my car, was for her short-term convenience? What planet was she from? Was there some secret parking etiquette manual I'd never received? "Convenient for you," I finally managed to say, my frustration starting to boil over into actual anger. "It's incredibly inconvenient for me. It's my driveway. The rule is incredibly simple. If you don't own the property, you don't park on the property." She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain an ocular muscle. "Oh my God," she muttered, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "It's a few feet of concrete. Are you really going to make a scene about this?" Then she did the unthinkable. She turned her back on me, a clear, deliberate signal that the conversation was over in her mind. She opened her car door. I was stunned into silence for a second. She was just going to blow me off, get in her car, and drive away, having learned nothing and conceded nothing. Some primal, territorial survival instinct kicked in. The part of my brain that was sick of being a doormat took over. "No, wait," I said, my voice suddenly much louder than I intended. "I'm not asking you anymore. I'm telling you, if you park here again, I will have your car towed." That got her attention. She spun back around, her eyes narrowed into slits. The mask of bored indifference was gone, and for the first time, I saw the real Karen underneath. It was a flash of pure, venomous anger. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "I know my rights. I'll sue you for damages." "I know my rights too," I shot back, feeling a weird rush of adrenaline. "It's called trespassing on private property. You park here again, and you'll be dealing with a tow truck, not me." She stared at me, her face a mask of incandescent fury. I stared right back. my heart hammering, but my resolve solidifying. The silence stretched for a few seconds. Finally, with a dramatic, theatrical huff, she got in her car and slammed the door so hard that I felt the vibration in my feet. She peeled out of the driveway, her tires screeching in protest, leaving a little black punctuation mark of burnt rubber on the concrete as a goodbye present. I stood there on my lawn, heart pounding, my hands shaking slightly. I'd won, right? She wouldn't be back. The threat had worked. The battle was over. Peace was restored to my quiet little kingdom. Of course, I was wrong. So wrong. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. For one glorious week, there was peace. A beautiful, empty driveway kind of peace. Every time I looked out my office window at that blessedly empty patch of concrete, I felt a little surge of victory. I had faced the Karen, I had drawn a line in the sand, or in this case the concrete, and the Karen had blinked. I started to relax, my shoulders unclenched. Maybe the threat of towing really was all it took. Maybe she had found a slightly less illegal place to park. I let myself believe it was over. Then came the next Tuesday. Budget meeting day. It was like she had it on her calendar. It was almost ritualistic. As if on cue, my 2-hour Zoom ordeal ends, I close the laptop. I do my customary stretch and post-meeting sigh, and I look out the window, expecting to see my little slice of victory. And there it is, the silver SUV. But it wasn't just parked on the edge this time. Oh no, this was different. This was a statement. She had parked her car horizontally, perfectly perpendicular to my own car in the driveway. She had parked across the entire width of my driveway, completely and utterly blocking my car in the garage. Her front bumper was maybe 6 inches from my garage door. It was a deliberate, calculated, meticulously executed act of automotive warfare. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a hot, white flash that consumed all other thought. This was beyond entitlement. This was targeted harassment. It was a prison sentence delivered by a domestic SUV. And to make it worse, I looked at my phone and saw the calendar alert. Dentist appointment, 2:30 p.m. I was trapped. A prisoner in my own home, held hostage by a spiteful woman and her beat-up vehicle. My first instinct was to find her. I had to. I stormed out of my house, my mind a red haze, and went straight to my immediate neighbors, the Hendersons. I knocked on the door, probably a little too hard. Mr. Henderson, a gentleman in his late 70s, answered, looking startled. I didn't even say hello. I just pointed a trembling finger at the car. Have you ever seen that car before? Do you know who owns it? I asked, my voice tight. He adjusted his glasses, peered at the SUV, and shook his head slowly. Never. Some people have a lot of nerve, son. A lot of nerve. I thanked him and went to the family on the other side. Same story. They'd seen it before, but had no idea who it belonged to. Fueled by a mix of desperation and fury, I started going door to door down the entire cul-de-sac. It was profoundly humiliating. Here I was, a grown man, marching around my neighborhood on a Tuesday afternoon asking, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you. Have you seen the owner of this badly parked SUV that has taken me hostage?" No one knew her. No one recognized the car. At each door, I got a sympathetic shake of the head and a muttered, "Wow, that's crazy." It was like she was a ghost who materialized out of thin air just to ruin my day. She had no connection to my neighborhood that I could find. After the 4th or 5th, nope, I gave up. My furious march slowed to a defeated shuffle as I walked back toward my house. This left me with only one move. The final move. The nuclear option. The one I had threatened but had secretly, desperately hoped I'd never have to use. I walked back to my house, the hot rage having cooled into a hard, calm, chilling resolve. This had to end. This person, this ghost, had pushed me past my limit. This wasn't about a parking spot anymore. This was about my home, my sanity, and the simple right to leave my own house. This was ending. Today, I was completely trapped. My blood was boiling. This woman had ignored a polite note, scoffed at a direct verbal request, and now had barricaded me in my own driveway out of pure, calculated spite. And believe me, what happens next is the whole reason I'm telling you this story. The climax is even crazier, more satisfying, and more unbelievable than you can possibly imagine. But real quick, if you've ever felt this kind of righteous, backed-into-a-corner anger, or if you're just enjoying this suburban psychodrama, please do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out, and it lets me know that I'm not the only one who has dealt with this kind of madness. And hey, if you want to hear more stories about the wild world we live in, consider subscribing. All right, back to the siege. Before I made the call, I wanted to be 100% certain I was in the legal right. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was methodical. I went to my computer and Googled towing car parked in my driveway laws, my state. I spent the next 20 minutes reading city ordinances, legal advice forums, and state law websites. The results were crystal clear and deeply validating. If a vehicle is on your private property without your consent, it's trespassing. If it's blocking you in, preventing egress from your own property, you have every right to have it removed at the owner's expense. Reading the black and white text of the law was like a balm on my frayed nerves. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the bad guy. I was the aggrieved party. Some sources recommended calling the non-emergency police line first, just to have an official record of the incident. So, that's what I did. I dialed the number, and when the dispatcher answered, I explained the whole situation in a calm, factual tone. "Good afternoon. There's a vehicle that has been repeatedly parking on my private property. I have asked the owner to stop. Today, she has returned and parked her car horizontally, blocking me in my driveway, and I cannot leave my home for an appointment." I gave them the make, model, and license plate. The dispatcher was surprisingly sympathetic. "Okay, sir, I've logged the complaint. Since it's on private property, it is a civil matter. You are well within your rights to call a private towing company to have it removed at the owner's expense." That was the official green light. That was all I needed to hear. My next call was to the first 24-hour towing company that came up on Google. Big Mike's Towing, a gruff, no-nonsense voice answered. I explained the whole saga again, this time with a bit more dramatic flair. The repeats. The polite note turned to litter, the condescending confrontation. And now, being blocked in. The guy, who I could only assume was the legendary Big Mike himself, let out a low chuckle. "Oh yeah, you got yourself a classic driveway squatter. We see it all the time. Don't you worry, son. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Just be outside to sign the paperwork." 20 minutes felt like an eternity. But the arrival of that tow truck was one of the most beautiful and majestic sights I have ever seen. It was a massive, bright yellow flatbed, and it was glorious. It came rumbling down my quiet little street with a triumphant chorus of beeps and hissing air brakes. A glorious chariot of justice. The driver, a big guy with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, hopped out of the cab. "You the one who called?" he asked. I nodded eagerly. "All right, let's see what we got." He walked over, took one look at the silver SUV parked nose to nose with my garage, and let out a long, low whistle. "Wow, she really jammed you in there. That's not an accident. That's a message." "That's what I've been trying to tell people," I said, the validation washing over me. He had me sign a form on a clipboard, authorizing the tow, and then he got to work. It was a masterclass in efficiency. The mechanical whine of the hydraulics, the authoritative clank of heavy chains on asphalt. This was really, truly happening. He was just about to hook up the chains to her front wheels when the front door of a house 3 doors down flew open with a bang. And there she was. She came sprinting down the street, screaming. It wasn't just a yell. It was a high-pitched, frantic animal shriek that shattered the afternoon peace. "What are you doing? What are you doing to my car? You can't do this! She ran right up to the tow truck driver, who didn't so much as flinch. He just stood there, arms crossed over his broad chest, a paragon of calm. "Ma'am, you need to step back," he said, his voice even and steady. "We're in the process of removing the vehicle. You're damaging my car." She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the equipment that wasn't even touching her vehicle yet. "I'm suing you! I'm suing him! I'm suing this whole street." I decided it was time and stepped forward. "I told you this would happen," I said, my voice as steady as the tow truck driver's. She whirled on me, her face a grotesque mask of twisted rage. You did this! You have no right. I was only parked here for a minute." "It's been over 3 hours," I said flatly, refusing to engage with the lie. "And you blocked me in?" "I did not." She lied, right to my face, with a tow truck and 3 witnesses present. "You're harassing me! This is harassment!" By now, my neighbors were peeking out their windows. The Hendersons were standing in their open doorway, watching the drama unfold. We had an audience. The tow truck driver, my new personal hero, finally spoke up again. "Look, lady, here's the deal. You're trespassing on private property. The homeowner wants you gone, so the car's getting towed. You have 2 options. Option 1, I hook it up. I take it to the impound yard. It'll cost you about $400 plus daily storage fees to get it back. Or," he paused for dramatic effect, "you can pay me a $150 drop fee, right now, in cash, and I'll drop it right here and be on my way." Her jaw hit the pavement. She looked from his implacable face to my stern one, to her car, and back again. You could literally see the gears grinding in her head, the volcanic rage fighting a losing battle with the cold, hard math of the situation. $150? She sputtered, her voice cracking. "That's extortion! I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," the driver said, pulling out his own phone and starting to tap on it. "I'll wait. They'll just tell you the same thing they told him. It's a civil matter. Your choice. Pay the drop fee or pay a lot more later." She stared him down, trying to intimidate him with the sheer force of her fury. He just stared back, unmoved, like a mountain staring at a stiff breeze. Defeated, she let out a sound that was half scream, half sob of pure frustration. "Fine!" She stomped over to her car, yanked her purse from the passenger seat, and started furiously digging for cash, muttering a stream of vitriol about how we were all criminals and crooks. She counted out the money, a mix of 20s, 10s, and 5s, and practically threw it at the driver. He calmly caught the crumpled bills, straightened them out, counted them one by one, and tucked them into his pocket. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said, completely deadpan. He unhooked his gear, swung back into his truck, and started it up. The woman just stood there in the middle of the street, vibrating with a silent, impotent fury as the massive tow truck rumbled away. The driver gave me a quick, subtle nod and a thumbs up as he passed, a parting gesture of solidarity that I will cherish forever. He left behind a beautiful, beautiful silence. Without another word or even a glance at me, she got in her car, reversed so fast that her tires squealed in protest, gave me one last look of pure, concentrated hatred through her windshield, and then sped down the street, blowing straight through the stop sign at the end of the cul-de-sac without even a hint of braking. And then she was gone. The silence that descended on the street was incredible. It was thick, peaceful, and profound. I just stood there in my driveway, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly beginning to fade, leaving a strange sense of exhaustion in its wake. I looked at the empty space where her car had been. It was the most beautiful patch of concrete I had ever seen in my life. Mr. Henderson from next door slowly walked over, a wide, slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, his voice full of amusement, "I haven't seen that much excitement on this street since the city tried to plant that sycamore tree back in '98. He gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Good for you, son. You did the right thing." I went inside and just collapsed onto my couch. I had completely missed my dentist appointment, but I didn't care. It was a small price to pay. I had taken back my driveway. The cost was $150 for her, and a week's worth of accumulated stress for me. But the principle of the thing was absolutely priceless. In the days that followed, I kept expecting some kind of petty revenge. An angry note taped to my door, a bag of trash left on my lawn, a scathing fictional review on the neighborhood app. But there was nothing, just peace. The silver SUV never appeared in my driveway again. I never even saw it driving on my street again. It was as if the whole bizarre, stressful episode had been a fever dream. The only physical evidence that it had ever happened was the faint black tire mark she'd left on my driveway, a tiny battle scar on my perfect, boring patch of concrete. So, that's it. That's my story of the Great Driveway War. It taught me that the Karen phenomenon isn't just a collection of funny internet memes. It's a real, tangible mindset where some people genuinely believe that the fundamental rules of private property, of courtesy, of simple social contracts, just don't apply to them if it causes them the slightest inconvenience. This whole ridiculous, stressful mess, from the first parking job to the final, humiliating cash payment, could have been avoided if she'd just had a single ounce of consideration, if she'd just said, "Sorry, my mistake." But she chose escalation. She chose confrontation. And in the end, she chose humiliation and a $150 fee. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best and purest form of justice is simply letting people face the natural, logical consequences of their own actions. My driveway has remained blissfully, beautifully, boringly empty ever since, and I have never been more grateful for a simple, inanimate strip of concrete in my entire life. It's my quiet, peaceful, undisputed territory once more. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have called the tow truck sooner? Would you have just given up and parked on the street yourself? And have you ever had a parking nightmare story of your own? I genuinely need to know I'm not alone in this madness. So drop your stories in the comments below. I promise you, I'll be reading them. Thanks for watching.